Hey everybody, welcome to Talking Together. Today we are just coming off the celebration of Reformation Day. Yesterday was All Saints Day. Today I want to read to you the gospel from this past week in our theological leftover. You can hardly call it a leftover. There's so much to chew on here. But I focused on the epistle reading, Romans chapter 3, and did not talk about the gospel reading, even though I studied it and I prepared to preach on it. And I read some things that I want to read to you today. More than me explaining stuff, I really just want to read something that was written by a former professor of mine, and it'll give you a lot to chew on. But before I do that, let me read to you the gospel reading from this past Sunday, Reformation Sunday, observed. It was John chapter 8, 31 to 36. John writes, "So Jesus said to the Jews who had believed in him, 'If you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free.' They answered him, 'We are offspring of Abraham and have never been enslaved to anyone. How is it that you say you will become free?' Jesus answered them, 'Truly, truly, I say to you, everyone who commits sin is a slave to sin. The slave does not remain in the house forever. The Son remains forever. So, if the Son sets you free, you will be free indeed.'" This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. What a beautiful text. It's hard not to laugh a little bit when the children of Abraham say, "We are offspring of Abraham and have never been enslaved to anyone." They didn't know their own history, and it's tempting to laugh, and yet, boy, is our idea of freedom messed up. As Americans, we think we know all about freedom, and I want to share a few things with you today to challenge that, to challenge what's probably your notion of freedom. And I hope I'm wrong, but I think in many cases I'm not. And what I'd like to use, I mentioned a former professor. In fact, I don't know if I even ever had him in a class, but he was there at Concordia Seminary in St. Louis when I was there. And his name is Dr. Robert Kolb. And he wrote this book, Speaking the Gospel Today, which I have to admit I haven't quite read all the way through. I've used it a little bit more as a resource book, and he's organized it in a way that makes it pretty handy. And he's talking about speaking the gospel today. He addresses a lot of those themes that are prevalent in our culture, in our life, and one of those is freedom. And so I want to read a couple of quotes from his little section where he talks about freedom and what we tend to think about it and what the scriptures actually say about it. And hopefully I'll get some input from some of you. He says, first of all, if we think of freedom as the absence of any conditions, confines, or constrictions which limit, define, or determine existence, then it is clear that the belief that God created and that we are his creatures denies the possibility of our being free. So he takes what is really often thought of in our culture as freedom, the definition of freedom, and he says to us as Christians, if you can't have it both ways. You can't have this definition of freedom that says it's the absence of any condition, confine, or constriction which limits, right? You can't say that freedom is the absence of any kind of limitations, any kind of definitions, any kind of truth, I might add. Any kind of determination, here's who you are. You can't have that and then also say God created you and you're his creature. Those two things are incompatible worldviews, incompatible world beliefs, right? So if that's what we think freedom is, then our confession of faith, just the first article of the creed, takes away our freedom, right? If that's what freedom is. Of course, we contend that that's not what freedom is. We believe in freedom. I just read about freedom, but it's not what many in America think that it is. Next quote. This is defining. Okay, this is good stuff. He says, and it's really relevant too. It's really beautifully put. He says, as creatures, that's what we are, right? Because God created us. We aren't creators, we are creatures. He says, as creatures, we are indeed free to be me, but we are not free to define me. That is the prerogative of the Creator. So there's your first important distinction. Let me read it to you again. And I'd love your feedback on this. As creatures, we are indeed free to be me, but we are not free to define me. That is the prerogative of the Creator. Does that make sense? Let me read the next quote. Dr. Kolb writes, freedom is true to itself only when it is always conscious of its debt to him that granted it, so that it is a committed rather than an uncommitted freedom, committed to him who gave it its authority. So we are free, but it's a committed freedom, committed to him who gave the freedom its authority. Right? So we are not sovereign in the same way God is. Right? We are committed to the one. Our freedom is committed to the one. It's under the one who gave it to us. Right? So he talks about something that's called I don't know if he made this up or not. I hadn't heard it before, but he talks about freedom in this way as prepositional freedom. Now, remember what a preposition is in basic grammar, right? A preposition helps us to understand one thing in relationship to another. So the fox is in, there's the preposition, the box. And the word in helps us to understand the relationship, in this case, in terms of space, the relationship between the fox and the box. The fox is in the box, right? So he talks about our freedom as prepositional freedom. It's in relationship to, right? So here's how examples of what he's talking about. He says freedom, we talk about three possible freedoms in terms of prepositional freedoms. Freedoms for service to God and his creation, right? So the freedom in relationship to service, the freedom in relationship to God, freedom for service to God, freedom for service to God's creation, right? So that gives you a sense of how Christians view freedom. It's freedom for service. Another kind of freedom. You may not like initially the idea of freedom for service, but you are freed for service because you don't have to work in order to win God's favor, do you? You don't have to try to win God's favor. Christ has given you the kingdom of heaven. He has made you children of God. He has made you heirs of the kingdom of heaven. So your work doesn't have to be about you. My good works do not have to be about me. They don't have to be self-centered. I struggle with self-centeredness, but I don't have to be self-centered. It's not necessary, right? The gospel has freed me, so I am freed for service to God and his neighbor. The gospel has done that. In the same way, the gospel has freed me from evil. See how that's a prepositional freedom? I have freedom from evil because I have been made holy, right? I've been freed from the accusations of the devil. I've been freed from my sin. Jesus has done this for me by his death and resurrection. So I am freed from all evil, and I am freed for service to God and his creation. Now, I also do have another sort of freedom, I guess, and that is I am free to go against God. I have a freedom to go against God. If I would like, as God's child, I can walk away. I wouldn't recommend it, right? Freedom, Robert Kolb says, freedom to act against God is the very opposite of the freedom to act in behalf of him and his creatures. And it's the latter. It's the freedom for service to God and his creation that is true human freedom, right? It frees up the opportunity to be in relationship with other people. It frees up the opportunity to love God and to love my neighbor. That's what freedom was given for, to be able to love freely, right? Beautiful, beautiful stuff here. So again, let me just kind of summarize here. If we think of freedom as the absence of any condition, confines, or constrictions which limit, define, or determine existence, then it is clear that the belief that God created and we are his creatures denies the possibility of our being free. So if we are creatures, then we are not free like our culture thinks. But that doesn't mean that freedom doesn't exist. It means that they're just wrong about their definition of freedom. As creatures, we are indeed free to be me, but we are not free to define me. That's the prerogative of the Creator. So, what does it mean for me to be free? How has the Creator defined it freedom? Well, the Creator has sent his Son Jesus, who died for my sins and who is risen from the dead so that I get to be his eternal, holy, saint, child, heir, right? And because of this good news, because of the gospel, I am freed from all evil, and I am freed for service to God and his creation. And that's what true freedom really is. And that's what Jesus is talking about, that the religious leaders just don't understand in John chapter 8, verses 31 through 36. I would love to hear what you think about this freedom in comparison to the freedom that you have been taught about in our culture. Feel free to share some comments. Feel free to share some comments. I guess feel free not to share some comments. You're free to do either. But I pray either way that God would bless your week. And I look forward to seeing many of you this Sunday, 9 o'clock sharp, Bible class, continuing to look through Ezra. And of course, Sunday morning at 10:30, the divine service. God bless you all.